On December 10th, 1983, Salima got married in Karachi, Pakistan. Like many weddings in Pakistan, it was full of vibrant colors, bright lights, and deliciously spicy food. But behind those lights was not a woman who was excited to get married on her wedding day. Behind those lights was a young girl who had just turned 15 and a half and had an arranged marriage with a man she only had one cup of chai with. Months before this photo was taken, she had dropped out of middle school, but had mentally disengaged years before, knowing that this day would be coming. She never worked formally in the Pakistani economy, but worked very hard at home, raising her 3 younger siblings and running a household of 7 individuals. Her lack of education and lack of financial independence had a domino effect on her self-esteem and on her self-worth. And the reason I know so much about Salima is because she's my mom. When my mom told me this story when I turned 15 years old, I realized that the issues that my mom faced in Pakistan are very different than the issues that women face here in the United States. All over the emerging markets, women face issues like honor killings, trafficking, female genital mutilation, things that we've read about in newspapers but don't really understand on an everyday basis. Here in the United States, we have issues like domestic violence, sexual harassment, and the gender gap in the workplace. But the one thing I did discover after talking to my mom is that both sets of issues required deep cultural change. And change is really, really hard, as we've seen in the presentations today. Whether it's an individual trying to shed a few pounds or an organization trying to stay relevant, change is really difficult, especially when it's deep cultural change. I started my professional life as a change management consultant, looking at organizations like Walmart and the World Bank and trying to help them change to achieve their goals. Sometimes it was effectiveness, and sometimes it was just financial gains and profits. The last year and a half in my MBA, I've begun to ask myself if it's possible for us to use those same frameworks and those same methods that businesses use to achieve change to actually impact change in the social arena, especially when it comes to important issues like elevating the role of women. I began this journey by looking at frameworks that businesses often use very commonly, like the change management curve. Now, I know what you guys are thinking. Is this all you guys do at the business school? Slides like this? Well, yeah, basically. Basically, that's it. But I promise this is going to be the only graph. And what we do is, whether it's CEOs or it's board of directors, what they do is they go through this 5-step process. If they're going through a merger or acquisition, they first become aware of a company that's relevant to acquire. Then they understand the shareholders of that company, the shareholders of their own company, to understand whether the synergies make sense. Then they do a little bit of experimentation. Should the product lines merge, or should they stay the same? Should our people merge into one geographic location, or should they stay separate? How is this kind of going to work? And then there's institutionalization. That's when the HR policies become the same. That's when there's one logo and one title. And then finally, there's internalization. And that internalization is when we kind of forget that United and Continental ever used to be 2 different companies, right? That's when it's fully internalized. So when we look at this in the gender paradigm, what we see is people like Sheryl Sandberg telling us to lean into the proverbial table. We have people like Anne-Marie Slaughter telling us that you can't really have it all, so you should reframe your expectations when it comes to work-life balance. And the media loves this. Everyone from The Economist to the New York Times has something to say to women or at women or about women. I mean, everyone loves to talk about this. So when we put this on the change curve, what we see is that as a society, we do a really great job at the step of awareness. Everyone knows this is an issue. But when it comes to understanding, we don't really know who the right stakeholders are in this conversation. When it comes to experimentation, we're scared to try new things in fear of messing up. And when it comes to institutionalization, lots of different organizations and countries are taking ad hoc policies, and no one really knows what's actually working. And at the end of the day, we look around and we say, why haven't we internalized this yet? But it's very clear that we're not going through the steps that are necessary to make that happen. So today what I want to do is focus on awareness, understanding, and experimentation, because these are the 3 steps that we as individuals can do something about. Let's start with understanding. Who are the key players? So in the business world, what we do is we look for players that are change agents. These are people who have both high interest as well as high influence. So the interest right now in society more broadly is pretty high because the data is out. We know that investing in women is not just a good idea socially, but makes economic sense, right? Just domestically here in the United States, if we close the gender gap, then we'll improve our GDP in 1 year by 9%. That's incredible, and there's so many statistics like this. So the interest is not an issue. Where we have a problem is the influence. Oftentimes, we don't look around to see who actually has the power when it comes to topics like these. So when we look at heads of state, what we see is that 95% of heads of state are men. And we see that 86% of executives are men. And we see that 80% of congressmen are men. And so what happens is it ends up being a conversation where a lot of women are talking to a lot of women, but the reality is the people who have high influence, whether we like it or not, are men. And so we have this huge segment of missing men that are key change agents, and they're sometimes not called to the table to kind of have this discussion, and oftentimes they're left on the sidelines to kind of watch and provide some opinions. And I think that's not the approach to take. I think that men are a really exciting segment that shouldn't just watch this, but can help us lead some real changes in moving the needle. So what exactly should these guys do? This is from the business world. What generally happens at this point is there's one executive who's super excited about technology. He invests in the technology, spends millions of dollars, millions of his shareholders' dollars, and then the technology absolutely fails. And the reason it fails is because there's no buy-in from the employees. No one really knows how to use the technology, and everyone's kind of like not so excited about it. And that's a problem. So when you look around in the gender arena, what generally happens when you ask guys these questions? When I ask my peers these questions at the business school, generally I get responses like these. Am I allowed to participate? I know I should help, and I want to help, and I'm game with what you're saying, Anita, but I'm not exactly sure what we should be doing. And my all-time favorite, I'm confused, right? And so what I want to do today is provide 3 tools that every man in this room can use to actually impact change. The first one is to challenge the gender breakdown, not just become aware of it. As students and professionals, we have the opportunity to go in and out of groups every single day, whether that's a classroom, a meeting, a boardroom, whatever it may be. And so it's important for us not to just say, what does a gender breakdown look like, but actually ask why that's the case. There was a researcher by the name of Adam Grant at the University of Pennsylvania who stood up in front of his MBA students and said, we have a lack of female leaders who are applying to and getting leadership positions. He was hoping that awareness alone would move the needle. He looked at the statistics, and there was a 0% increase in the number of women who applied for leadership positions. The following year, in front of the next cohort, he said the same things. He said, we have a lack of women applying for leadership positions. And this time, at the end of it, he said, that's ridiculous. We should do something about it. And he saw a 56% increase in the number of women that not just applied, but actually got leadership positions. So not asking for drastic change here, just small additional steps. Next, we have to be intentional about seeking out the female perspective. We know that females are underrepresented quantitatively oftentimes in these rooms, but also qualitatively. A lot of females, including myself, will either mumble the answer in class or kind of raise our hand. And it's really important that you nudge us a little bit to ask the question or to raise our hand high. Barack Obama, in his 2014 end of the year press conference, only called on female journalists very intentionally. It made headlines the next morning. They talked about everything, from freedom of speech, North Korea, to the 2015 legislative agenda. The content didn't change. All he did was make a small tweak in how he was going to approach the press conference. And if we can take those small tweaks today, especially the men, it can make a huge difference. And lastly, it's important to practice with our inner circle. Oftentimes, these issues feel very far and very distant, but they're not. Look to your left, look to your right, and if you haven't pulled out your phone already in this presentation, go ahead, this is your opportunity, pull it out, and before you check your phone, look at your favorites. And I guarantee you, there's at least one woman you care about deeply, and you want to make sure that she's in a world with equal opportunity. There was a researcher who looked at politicians who had daughters, first daughters. And the same researcher looked at executives, CEOs, who had daughters. And they realized that when both politicians and executives had daughters, they implemented more women-friendly policies. And the idea was that there was a huge amount of empathy, understanding that the daughter would one day become an employee or a citizen, voting citizen of the world. And I don't think that we all need to have daughters to have that empathy, although that would also be great. But I don't think we all need to have daughters. I think we just need to look around and ask that question. And the reason why I'm so optimistic about this is because I've seen these small changes by change agents work well in the business world, and I've also seen it work well with my dad. Although my mom looked like she had a very bleak future when she was 15 years old, my dad encouraged her to get her GED and join part-time community college. She eventually became a serial entrepreneur, selling another one of her businesses this year and starting a new one at the end of the year. If you can't tell by these photos, she's also quite a firecracker, so there's no self-esteem problems here. And I think it was because my dad didn't wake up and say, let me save all of the women of Pakistan and ensure they're empowered. He looked at my mom and said, this is someone I care about deeply, and I think I can take small steps to make a huge difference. And I think if all of the people in this room dedicate themselves to taking small steps, we can make magnificent strides on this topic. Thank you.